meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Unmini.
Unmini.
Yep, Unmini.
Unmini.
And we have Vajra, who's going to be helping us today, just doing a little bit of visuals.
Okay.
And I'm just so glad because the problem that I have with my body is something that Liz is going to talk to us about today relative towards getting EMF pollution in your house down to an absolute minimum. So
Right.
she's now my favorite person. So thank you so much for
Great.
coming.
Thank you.
That kind of stuff. If only I was 25. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll put your sneakers on. Yes.
I am.
This is Liz. Liz, this is Larry.
Hi. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
So Larry, you can just throw your shoes anywhere, or if you want, you can, as always, come in on the carpet. So Liz, if you want to kind of take it away, because you said that there was a. Is it okay if we stand? I'm kind of. You can see the standing desk. I'm sort of a standing person.
Whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, standing is
and
good for me.
So I can answer your questions, or the other thing that's going to be really helpful,
Yeah.
I give about a 15-20 minute introduction of the different kinds of EMFs and what the issues
I
are.
kind of think that's what maybe we want to do because we were thinking that maybe having Larry here might be helpful.
Yeah.
All right, Larry. So we're all going to put our heads together for a little bit of class. Would you?
So I get to improve my education.
Okay, so this is a packet of information for you.
Oh, sure. Thanks.
And what this includes, it's an EMF assessment guide,
Okay.
which has common tips and explanations. So you're not going to have to take notes as we go through this.
I like that.
And what I wanted to do first is just give you a very brief overview of what we're going to be doing today. What are the EMFs
Right.
that we're going to be looking at?
Okay.
What's the concern?
Okay.
And what do the numbers mean?
And I can take a glance at it, and then maybe we can have Larry hold on to it,
Oh,
just because you
no,
know it is. I'm so familiar,
But,
right?
no, just go ahead and do your thing. I'm a fly on the wall.
Okay. So just as a very brief overview, every electrical device emits an electromagnetic field. And there's what's called the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right.
And these different frequencies are categorized by the number of waves or cycles per second. So they're all in a wave formation, and each wave is called a hertz. So you have, on the electromagnetic spectrum, you start with extremely low frequencies like power lines, that's an example, and you go up the spectrum and you get to microwaves and wireless, and you keep going and you get to X-rays and gamma rays.
Right.
So we look at 4 kinds of man-made electromagnetic fields, and we use the term EMF as a general catch-all for these different kinds of man-made fields.
So in a way, what we could say is the fridge lets off EMF waves. The stove, if it has electrical components, is letting off EMF waves. And is it also the electrical system running through your walls?
Yes.
Letting off EMF waves.
Yes.
So essentially anything that we think of as having an electrical component is somehow emanating some amount of these waves coming off.
Yes, and so that's correct.
Okay.
So there's 4 kinds that we look at.
Okay.
So the first one is electric fields. And electric fields are 60 hertz or 60 cycles per second. And this is coming from the wiring in your walls and the cords that are plugged in. So everything that we measure, it's all based on the science and the numbers. And so the guidelines that building biology recommends, most homes have higher than recommended levels in the sleeping area. So electric fields are associated with, it suppresses melatonin production. And so people sleeping and other
And even electric. So at 60.
correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
So we really do want the whole spectrum, even things that we might not automatically think of.
Correct.
As making us, being a weight on our head.
And for people who are electrical sensitive, which is the majority of my clients, they notice the most improvements in their health when they reduce down all 4 of these kinds of EMFs. Okay. And then the second one is magnetic fields. you've always got water pressure there. And that's like electric fields. It's always there as long as the breakers are turned on.
Right.
But water only flows when you turn on the faucet. And that's like magnetic fields. Magnetic fields are only there when you turn on a device or when current flows.
Gotcha. So like right now, that lamp being plugged in, right? It's actually on a surger, which means it's not, so I'm lying.
Right.
But let's pretend it's plugged into the wall.
Right.
That lamp will have electric, but
Correct.
it will only have magnetic if I turn it on and the light bulb's going.
Correct.
Okay.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about the sources for magnetic fields in a minute, but I want to just, first of all, just tell you the 4 that we look at. So the third one is wireless, and that's from cell towers, cell phones, any wireless device. And the fourth one is what we call dirty electricity. And what this is, these are high frequency spikes that ride along on the wiring in your walls. And so remember, you've got the 60 hertz smooth electric field. So then you have these higher frequency spikes that are riding along on the wiring in the walls.
Now, from the little bit of reading that I've done about it, I've read that the American grid system is considered to be diagnosed as having major problems with dirty electricity. Is it due to something outside the house, meaning that the electrical grid of America stinks? Because I've read that like Google and a lot of other providers that rely on hugely electrical situations are screaming to Washington saying we have to totally updo our grid. Like our electrical system stinks, or can we cure dirty electricity here in the house? Meaning, is it a house individual, like my next door neighbors don't have it, I have it?
Great question. It's both. So what happens is that you have devices in your house that are creating this dirty electricity. Your neighbors...
It's device caused.
Yes. It's anything that uses alternating current. So certain things produce more of it than others. So for example, compact fluorescent lights, dimmer switches, solar inverters are a big producer of dirty electricity.
Solar panels got put in across the street,
So-
or across the sidewalk.
So what I do is if you're on the same transformer, you could be getting high levels that are coming in. And I can measure both or get a real good idea of what you're producing versus what's coming in on the grid. If it's coming in on the grid, there's a pretty easy way to block it at your main panel.
Oh, excellent. I've read a tiny bit about that.
Yeah.
Right, it's just like a component that essentially acts as a buffer. And the dirty electricity from the grid tries to come in and it just neutralizes it.
Correct.
Now, when you were mentioning about the solar panels, because that's such a huge thing out here in California, is that something that the solar panel companies know about? Do the electrical companies know that it creates dirty electricity?
Yes, I've talked to some of the companies. You know, they'll be set up at Home Depot, and I've just talked to people at various places, and they're aware of it, but it's expensive for them to fix it. So that's probably why.
Okay.
Germany is more aware of it, so their inverter is probably, I get less, it's still really high, but it's not as high as some of the other inverters that I've seen. The Sunny Boy, which is made in Germany, so they've tried to address it to some degree.
Well, and Germany said no to smart meters, by the way. So they're on it when it comes to realizing that this has a drag on human health right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to measure those 4 things. Awesome.
And coming back to magnetic fields for a minute, there's different sources for magnetic fields. I mentioned power lines. So one source is what we call point sources. And this is devices in your home that are turned on. We don't worry about those so much because that type of field drops off real quickly. Once you're like a foot away from it, it's down to pretty much ambient levels.
Like what would an example of that be? Is it the lamp?
Yeah.
You walk away from the lamp's not going to...
Yeah. A computer.
Okay.
Toaster.
So you're saying they're very localized.
Correct.
And you stop using it. Okay.
Then once you're like just a short distance away, it's insignificant. So we don't worry so much about that. The second one is power lines. Power lines, that magnetic field drops off real slowly.
Right.
So if I walk into a home and I turn on my meter and I see really high magnetic fields in all throughout the house, the first thing I suspect is power lines.
Okay.
The third one is wiring errors in your home. And wiring errors, so every circuit in your home, the current goes out from the panel on the hot and it comes back on the neutral.
Does that sound about right to you, Larry, based on what you know?
Okay.
This has all been rewired with about 10 years ago, and it's all up to code and inspected.
Yeah, and if what goes out on the hot is what comes back on the neutral, everything's fine and you're balanced.
Okay.
Sometimes an electrician or a homeowner, they make a mistake and they accidentally have two neutrals from two different circuits touching each other in a junction box. And it's a violation of the National Electric Code. And then what happens is the current goes out on the hot, and then some of it goes back on its own neutral, some of it goes another way, and there can be, and that creates an imbalance in current,
Right, yeah.
which can create magnetic
Because
fields.
it's not in its own contained loop.
Right.
It's instantly started involving others, and then you have electric chaos.
And most likely, everything is fine. You used a licensed electrician, and so I don't find those very often.
But we'll just check it out anyway.
But I
just in
check
case.
every house,
Okay.
and that way you know.
Yeah.
Okay. And another one is neighbors' wiring errors. So your neighbor has this imbalance in current. It has to go somewhere, and so typically houses are grounded to the water pipe. So it goes out on their water pipe, comes down the street, comes in on your water pipe, and I can find big streaks of magnetic fields in people's homes.
Okay.
So these are all things that can be addressed.
Okay.
So that's the kinds of EMFs that we look at, what their sources are. So now what does the science say? So I got my certification through the Building Biology Institute. And Building Biology, it's a non-profit education and training organization that came over from Europe. It was started in Europe after World War II, in Germany actually, when homes that were being built, for example, they were using toxic paints and it was making people ill.
Right.
So building biology, it's a group of studies it's a holistic studies of how the built environment affects human health. And the building biology guidelines are based on what the science says, and reviewing all of the studies, as well as thousands of these assessments of people's homes. And building biology has no concern, slight concern, severe concern, and extreme concern levels. And they have guidelines for wireless, magnetic, and electric. And when I come into someone's home, my goal is to get people into the no concern or slight concern levels. And these levels here, this is for wireless or radio frequency, and these are different units of measure. They all mean the same thing, but I typically talk to people in this first one, that's microwatts per meter squared, because you can see the numbers just make more sense. They're like whole numbers.
They're whole numbers and they're simpler.
Yeah. But for just a minute, I want to go to this other one, which is microwatts per centimeter squared. So you can see the building biology extreme concern is greater than 0.1.
Right.
The risk for early childhood leukemia doubles at 0.2 to 8 microwatts per centimeter squared. The younger the children in the study, the lower the level to see the effect.
Right.
So I'm just going to make a note here, 0.2 to 8 leukemia.
Right.
So in some other countries like China, Italy, and Russia, the allowed limit is 10. And most people react like you do. They go, wow, if this is where leukemia doubles, and this is extreme concern, greater than 0.1. 10 seems pretty high,
It
right?
does seem super high.
Super high. So in the US, the allowed limit is 1,000.
Oh, okay, so you're saying that this numbering system isn't intuitive at all?
Right.
Because we're not getting a real sense of any sort of metric that any of us can utilize. If the US says 1,000 and 0.2 is something that...
The US standard or guidelines, it's based on old science from the 70s and 80s, where it was believed that if it didn't heat you, it wouldn't hurt you. So it's only based on thermal or heating effects.
Can you imagine that? I mean, you'd have to
I'm
literally...
embedded in the 1950s.
You'd have to be doubling over, like from radiation poisoning. And then they're like, that looks unsafe. I mean, we can't deal with anything subtle. It's like we're developmentally handicapped as a country. And it also shows that even the regulations that we have in place right now are so outdated and crazy.
There's a huge gap between what's legal and what's safe. So,
and look at that, China, Russia, in some ways you could look at it, those governments, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong. It sounds like they're protecting their people more by having these higher standards. Could we term it that way, or do you think I'm not?
I would say that's good. In our country, the industry has a lot of influence at the regulatory and government levels in terms of these guidelines.
She said it, not me. Okay, so Liz said that,
But so I tell people this so they can understand. So if someone says that something is only 1% of the allowed limit,
right.
That's actually really high.
Right.
And I measure, for example, routers that would not be legal in other countries.
See, this is what we're going to get down to the bottom of.
Okay.
Right, because here's the thing. I'm just going to take what you say at face value. I mean, Larry's more of like a science. You know, I don't care. I mean, because I just know that this stuff is not healthy because I am actually sick. But I wanted more for like Larry to have just some background that, you know, I'm not like making it,
I'm not sick, I'm just old.
Well,
and that this is very real. Do you know, and that there is science to it, and I mean, Liz got a degree in all of this stuff, and that countries have such different standards, you know, and we're going to try to get me to the same standard that they have, like in China.
Well, I'll tell you just one thing in terms of, you know, effects. So this was classified as a 2B carcinogen in 2011 because of increased risk for brain tumors. But there's many other, and that's it's in the same category as lead and DDT and gasoline fumes.
Which we all get that those things are bad, right?
But,
we have the little things on the gas, right? I mean, if someone
I
says...
sort of like the smell of gasoline.
Yeah. So, anyway, but what most people aren't aware of, you know, people might have heard that there's some long-term issues with this. What they're not aware of, it's estimated about 30% of the population is moderately sensitive to this, which means the most common symptoms are difficulty sleeping, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, headaches, irritability, anxiety, and then others. Those I see over and over.
And then they go to Kaiser, and Kaiser doesn't say, hey, let's have Liz come to your house and do an electrical study to figure out if that's what's giving you these symptoms. What do? They give you a pill. And then you're masking it, and you never even figure out that it actually is something that you've bought, like your wireless router or something like that, that's making you sick.
Right. And it's just not part of their training or their paradigm. So they're just not, although the California Medical Association did come out with a resolution calling for a reduction in exposures, but it hasn't made it to the rank and file or most.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what you come up with. For example, you have a power line that runs right up and down this street,
Right.
and another one down there, but this
Right.
one is
Right.
25 feet away.
Yeah. Generally, the local distribution lines that run into people's homes, that's usually not an issue. So we'll see.
Yeah. Good. Well, I'll be on my way. I have another appointment this morning. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
But does that make sense, Larry? You don't
Thank
have
you
any other
for the
questions
presentations.
about,
They're interesting.
you know, people go to school about this stuff and Liz is help trying to do her thing.
Right? You have sold me.
Yay! Hey, Larry, thank you so much for your
Okay.
time. I do super appreciate it as always.
Yes.
And I hope you have a great rest of the day. So we're going to ask Liz just a couple questions about what she does for work and her life. So how did you become an EMF consultant? And what is that job, really?
Okay. So I was involved in a cell tower issue in my neighborhood in Walnut Creek, and that led me to learning more about this issue. So I'm an EMF consultant. I'm certified to measure and mitigate the different types of electromagnetic fields. So I go to people's homes and I measure these different EMFs and I help them to reduce down their exposures.
So in lots of ways, you're almost like a healthcare worker. Does that make sense? Because, do you find that people have you come in for intellectual reasons? Like, oh, I've just read that maybe this isn't safe, so we're going to have Liz come into our house. Or is it more like, for instance, like my situation, where I'm like, wow, I'm really sick. I need your help. And I've actually traced it back through a lot of reading and figuring out and taking things out of the house. No, that didn't change things. That EMFs are probably making me sick. So is it usually you being a healthcare worker, or is it more of an intellectual thing that people are just having you come in?
I would say 80% of my clients are symptomatic, like you. They're ill from it, and they've tried many different things, and they finally have gotten to the point where they think this might be the source of their symptoms. Another 10% are families that want a healthier environment for their children.
Ah, okay.
And maybe another,
Makes a ton of sense.
and then maybe another 10% are people buying homes and just want to make sure there's no serious issues with the home that they're buying.
Oh, that's so neat. Okay, that's super cool. So what's your favorite thing about being an EMF consultant?
Yeah, I love my work. I get to make a real difference in people's health. And sometimes it can be simple things like they're sleeping better, or sometimes it can be just really amazing changes in their health. And you were saying to me earlier when we talked, what makes your heart sing? And that's what makes my heart sing, because I get to make that difference. If people knew what they were being exposed to on a daily basis in their homes from the wireless devices in their homes, and what their children were being exposed to from the routers and the wireless routers in their classroom, they would make changes. That would be the one thing that that I could wish that people knew.
Like, do you think in some ways that we'd be healthier if we went back to being more of a wired culture and had wireless and just only focused areas and for focused reasons?
Yes.
Do you see us ever going in that route? Like, is that part of your mission is to see if we could go back to being wired? Or do you feel that the train's already left the station, it's never going to happen, and it's all going to be about mitigating our wireless world?
You know, I don't know what we're going to do long term, but I do know at this point the best solution is hardwired. And we're reaching a tipping point because more and more people are becoming symptomatic. And like I said, it's estimated,
And it bums me out.
you know, 30%, it's estimated 30% of the population is moderately sensitive. Difficulty sleeping, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, headaches, that kind of thing. But they haven't connected the dots that this might be caused by their overexposure to these different kinds of EMFs. But more and more people are becoming symptomatic, and it can't go on much longer.
Right.
It has to change, and maybe we'll develop a better way of doing this. We have to.
Liz, well, thank you so much. And again, I can't wait to see you work, right? Because then we're going to have some great results.
Okay? Okay. Okay. Wow, you're lucky. I mean, it's really low from nearby cell towers.
Sweet. That's my kitchen. Bad boy.
Yeah. let's just see where your head would be.